So we've been divided and we're teetering off a cliff. It seems like civil war is not far away. Why are we so stuck? What has really happened that we can't get our act together? Find the answer to that and more on today's podcast. Hello folks, welcome back to the podcast. So last couple of weeks we've been talking about how we've been divided, and right now it's at the point where we're really stuck as a nation. We're not going anywhere. We're kind of not able to really get past this. And today we're going to delve a little bit more into why it is that we're stuck. The last couple of episodes, if you remember, we talked about how they divided us kind of in two phases. The first one is when they told us that there is no absolute truth. And of course, the absolute truth, the truth that's out there in the real world, is really the only thing that can unite us. So by taking that away, they sort of cut us all away from each other, and we start to drift apart and each sort of regress into our own little world. So that was kind of how they started, but then they actually deliberately went in and pushed us apart even further by, and this is what we talked about in the last episode, what we talked about are there's two flavors of humans. We kind of we kind of go either with one side or with another. This is where right and left in politics comes in. And so they use the natural tendency of us to either side with one or the other to push us apart even further and to actually basically lie to us and get us to focus on our emotions and our opinions instead of the truth and what's actually going on. So these two things have happened, but now we're at the point in this game where we're actually really, really stuck. And so last week we had talked about how because the universe is made up of two different forces, according to the Chinese, it is vital to have these two forces existing and in a sort of conflict with each other. It is this conflict which springs forth life. So you cannot have life if you don't have both of these forces acting together. However, the conflict is a healthy conflict. A society that's healthy agrees on the most basic values. And this is where things have gone wrong. Our conflict is reaching so deep right now that we no longer agree on the most basic values. As you can see, the left and the right, they want two completely different worlds, nothing to do with each other. They differ in economics, in family values, in social values, everything. Everything's completely different. So the question is, how do things get to be so different? And because that's really what has made us stuck, right? That where the conflict reaches so deep that we no longer even see our way back to each other. So there is precedent for this, even in American history. If we look back in the Civil War, this is exactly what happened, right? In those days, they called the big issue slavery, right? And we could no longer agree on whether slavery was right or wrong. Now, it wasn't really slavery. It was actually kidnapping and human trafficking. Okay, slavery is kind of something else. This was way worse. This was truly a crime. And the U.S., we couldn't even agree on whether this crime was okay or not. And then what happened after that is we had a civil war. The Union, the country actually did break up. The southern states seceded from the Union. They left the country. They formed their own country, and then there was a war. The North won, and so then they brought the countries back together. But this is what happened when our values were were quite different. And so we have the same situation now. So this is why I keep saying that we're very likely headed to another civil war, and it's because we're seeing the same thing that we saw back then. So we need, let's say first of all, that the left has really gone past the point of no return here. Why the left and not the right? Well, in this case, the left has been in power for many, many decades. The policies that, the country has been swinging towards the left violently. The policies that are supported even by the so-called Rhino Republicans are leftist policies. The entire country has shifted drastically to the left. So the left has been in power for a very long time. and the power has gone to their head, and they've really gone past the point of no return. We need them to come back to sanity, or we need some sort of a sane left, so that we can go back to having a normal conflict that a healthy society should have. So, that being said, let's talk about what happened to the left that drove them completely away from American culture. And we've talked a little bit about this, but here's where we're going to get a little bit shocking. And what I'm going to say now is going to shock you, but give me the benefit of the doubt and let me explain what I'm talking about, and you'll see that there's a lot of merit to what I'm saying. So, what's behind this insanity? I'm going to say that it's Satanism. Satanism, as in worship of the devil. Right now, you're probably thinking now, oh my God, this guy's gone crazy. He's going to go into religious fervor now, and he's going to start with all these scare tactics and all this gory imagery. Well, guess what? I'm not going to do any of that, okay? Because when people talk about Satanism, that's what they always do. They focus on the gory imagery. They focus on all the stupid nonsense that they do, all these rituals or whatever. I could care less about that. What I'm worried about are the ideas behind Satanism, okay? Because when you talk about the shock and the gore, that doesn't help you understand things. And the reality is the key to sort of diffusing Satanism is to try to understand it. Because only then you see how stupid the whole thing is. Satanism is really a set of very wrong, very stupid, and totally fucked up ideas. And when you look at the ideas and you remove all that drama and all that gore from it, you start to see that they don't even make any sense. They don't even work. So that's what we're going to look at today. And we're going to see how the left has taken this philosophy and run with it. Even though they may not admit to it, they may not even know it, but in reality, that's what's happened. So let's dig into this a little bit. So you might be saying that, God, this guy, he can't be serious. 21st century America, Satanism, come on, we're past all that, right? We're secular, we're advanced, we have all this technology now. What are you talking about? This isn't the Middle Ages anymore. So let me say that the greatest trick the devil ever pulled is convincing everyone he doesn't exist. And that's what has happened here. Okay? We have been bombarded by satanic ideas for decades now on a constant basis, not even a daily basis. It's been a constant basis. And we've been bombarded by it so much that we've gotten used to it. And we think they're normal ideas, but they're not. So when I tell you what these ideas are, you're going to be shocked. Okay, so why is it the greatest trick the devil ever pulled? Why does he always go that route where he says, oh no, devil doesn't exist, evil doesn't exist? Well, because when he does that, it takes away the fear of evil. You can't be afraid of something that doesn't exist. But evil does exist, and evil's very attractive. And if you're not afraid of evil, if you don't have the fear to keep you away from it, at least in the early stages before you can understand what's happening, that fear is what keeps you alive. If you take the fear away, you're going to naturally drift. All of us will drift in the direction of evil because evil is attractive and evil is easy, right? It's easy to give into your passions. It's easy to, eat too much or drink too much or, go out and party and have a great time, and it's easy to let yourself go. So if you don't have that fear, that's the only thing that stops you until you have the maturity and the intellect to realize, why you shouldn't do that. So it was a very clever ploy that they did by taking away all the gore and all the shocking imagery, all that blood and the human sacrifice and all that stuff. They took that away and they just brought the basic ideas, which are much more sterile looking, and some of them even sound reasonable. But this is why this is the part we need to look at, because this is the core of where the evil springs from. So let's start looking at those ideas. First of all, what is Satanism? So we're going to look at this from two sides. The first side is going to be from the Bible, the biblical side from the Old Testament. And secondly, we're going to look at a contemporary, a current, modern day satanic organization that has written many books and put a lot of material out there. So we're going to see what they have to say about Satanism and how they describe it. So first of all, let's look at the Bible, the Old Testament. So I'm going to focus on two areas of the Old Testament. The first one is actually in the 5 books of Moses. It's a story of a man named Balaam. He is a Gentile prophet, which is rather unusual. A prophet who's not part of the nation of Israel. And long story short, he was on his way. He was traveling to do something evil that God was not agreeing with. So God sent him an angel to warn him on the way to not do what he was planning to do. So when the angel stood in front of him, the Hebrew original, Bible actually uses the word Satan, which is where we get Satan from. Same word pronounced differently. So it says, though, that the angel stood as a Satan in front of Balaam. So the word Satan originally meant enemy. That's it. Not a master of the universe, not a, some rival of God or whatever. No, it just meant enemy. That's it. So that's the origin of the word. It's just enemy. Now, so that's the first reference in the Bible. The second one, if you go to the book of Job, which occurs much later in the Old Testament, Satan plays a pretty big part here. And Satan is described as one of the angels of God. So God has a lot of angels around him. One of them is named Satan, which of course we now know means enemy. So the question is, enemy of what? And the answer to that is, he is the enemy of mankind. Now what does that mean? If you remember, in Genesis, in the book of Genesis in the Bible, human beings are created in the image of God. So there was a sort of project, so to speak, of God creating the humans. So we are kind of like a project. Well, Satan is against the entire project. He disagrees with it, doesn't like it. And that's his problem. And that's what makes him an enemy of mankind. And he actually says in the book of Job, man is worthless. Why do you even spend any effort on them? They're not worth it. Just get rid of them. So that's who Satan is in the Old Testament, right? So remember that. Keep that burned into your forehead, okay? He is the enemy of mankind because we are going to see this again. Okay, now let's move over to the Church of Satan, which is a modern-day satanic church here in the United States. And its founder and leader is a Dr. Anton Szandor Levi was his name. He wrote a lot of books. He was very prolific in the sense that he tried to do some sort of outreach to tell people what Satanism was and to try to bring more people in. So I read some of what he wrote. He wrote a satanic Bible, and he has a list of 9 satanic statements. Kind of like the 10 Commandments in the Bible, he has 9 satanic statements. So we're going to look at those, but before, I'm going to talk about an interview he had where I heard him speak about Satanism, and he was asked point blank, what is Satanism? Just kind of layman's definition. What is Satanism? And he said very simple. He said, for thousands of years, all the religions have always talked about God, a creator that we need to serve. Satanism does away with all that, and it asks the question, why don't we have a religion for us? For what we want, for our desires, not what God wants, but what we want. Okay? Has your jaw hit the floor yet? Because he said, that's it. This is the basic definition of Satanism. Has your jaw hit the floor yet? Because where have we heard this? All over pop culture for the last few decades. Just do whatever you want. It's all good. There's nothing wrong with anything. Just do whatever you want. Well, this is Satanism, according to the founder of the Church of Satan. So that's the first thing we're going to say. The second thing, let's get into the 9 statements. Okay, so the 9 statements I found to be rather uninteresting. Many of them are redundant. So what I did is I classified them. There's actually 4 basic ideas, expressed by the 9 statements. So many of them express the same idea in a slightly different way. So the first idea is our animal desires, right? So one of the statements says, for example, indulgence instead of abstinence. So don't abstain, just indulge, have a good time, right? Another statement says, practice all the so-called sins, as they all lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification, right? So same idea, said 2 different ways. The third statement says, man is just another animal, right? But because of his development, his divine and spiritual development, he's become more vicious than all the other animals. So again, we're animals, just sink to your animal self, and it's fine. And finally, it says vital existence instead of spiritual pipe dreams. So don't dream about spiritual things in the future that we're going to elevate, a bunch of nonsense. Just focus on the here and now and your vital existence, your core existence. So those are 4 statements that focus on the idea of following your animal desires. So that's one idea. Second idea is to be selfish and not have a sense of charity. So there's 3 statements under this one. One of them says, give kindness to those who deserve it instead of wasting love on ingrates, on people that are ingrates. Okay, so you shouldn't be charitable. You should mirror the other person's behavior. If he's kind to you, you're kind to him. He's nasty to you, you're nasty to him. Okay? Second statement says, follow vengeance instead of turning the other cheek. Okay? So again, mirroring the other person's behavior. Comes after you, you go after him. And the third statement says, give responsibility to the responsible instead of concern for psychic vampires. So again, same kind of idea, right? You're not being charitable, you're not going out of your way, you're basically just treating people kind of at face value, mirroring their behavior, giving them what they give you. So that's the second idea, selfishness, non-charitability. The third one is the pursuit of power. Okay, there's one statement under here, and it says to pursue undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit. Okay, undefiled wisdom, because wisdom leads to power. Okay? And the fourth idea was a very simple one. He's just criticizing the church. And so basically he says, Satan has been the best friend the church has ever had, as he has kept it in business all these years. Okay? So that's it. We've gone through the 9 satanic statements. Now, you're probably not too shocked by the content of these statements, and that alone should shock you. Because if we find this to be familiar, and many of us are following these, which we are, okay, and I'll include myself in this as well, we have unknowingly been following Satanism. Okay? So now, let's look at how is this satanic? I mean, some of it even sounds reasonable. Some of it even sounds correct. So how is this, how is the enemy of mankind, focused in these ideas? Well, let's look at 2 different things. First of all, there's a very strong negative slant to the whole 9 statements, right? You don't see a positive future. You don't talk about a beautiful world and a beautiful future and how there's love and you should kind of reach out to people. There's none of that here, right? It's basically a very negative outlook that says we're all a bunch of animals, so just have a good time while it lasts, and that's it. So that's one thing. Why is it so negative, right? Why can't humankind have a beautiful future? Why can't we elevate and look forward to a better day tomorrow, right? Apparently that's not in the cards for these guys. And second of all, it's very destructive, okay? Where would we be if all humans practiced this? As a quick example, what if we all believed in vengeance? Okay, what would end up happening? There would never-ending killings. We saw this actually, if you remember the old movie The Godfather, when this one guy goes to Sicily and he's in this old village and he doesn't see any men, he only sees women. So he asks his guards, where have all the men gone? And they say, well, they're all dead from vendettas. Because that's what they do. They all just constantly take revenge they all end up dead. So just as an example, this is where it would lead. Okay? And similarly to this, the other laws are, quite similar. If you're not charitable, how do you raise children if you're not charitable? How do you help, someone who's fallen into a deep dark hole and he's nasty and thinks he doesn't want any help? It just doesn't work, right? It turns the world into a hell, which I guess is what they want. So it's negative, it's destructive, and the third thing is it's deceptive. Okay? Kind of like a drug dealer, they promise you pleasures. They say, just follow your animal instincts. You're going to have a great life. It's going to be so pleasurable. But in the end, they deliver destruction. Right? It's like that drug dealer offering you the first shot of heroin. You're going to feel so good. And in 10 years, you're going to be dead. So this is their outlook. I mean, they have a negative outlook on life. So there's no future, according to their own philosophy. It's just have a good time while it lasts. Right? So now, let's take a look at what they call wokeism, which is sort of the fashionable philosophy du jour, so to speak. And so, what is wokeism? And is it similar to Satanism? Let's take a look. So if you look it up in Wikipedia, it kind of mentions two things, the philosophy and the implementation of wokeism. Under philosophy, it says that they reveal and condemn concealed forms of domination tied to identity, gender, and race. Okay? So there's all kinds of domination buried in identity, gender, and race. Okay, so it's possible that exists. The second point is that society is really just a dynamic of oppressor versus oppressed. Okay? And the third thing in the philosophical area is that those who have been awakened, or the woke people, this is where the word woke comes from, it's from waking up. Those who have awakened push for the destruction of all these social structures which sustain all this oppression. So that's the philosophy. And how is it implemented? Two things they mention. They adopt inclusive language, and they reconfigure education, especially destroying all the gender norms. Okay? So, what's wrong with it? What's wrong with wokeism? Well, guess what? Like Satanism, it is negative, deceptive, and destructive. Okay? Same trajectory. So it's negative. There's no mention of any positive things about life. Usually when you talk about a philosophy, you're trying to understand the whole world, so it's pretty broad. This philosophy is very focused on the negative. They don't mention anything good with the world. Everything is just like horrible, negative. So kind of the same type of negativism you see in Satanism. Obviously, if you go down this road, it leads to depression, rage, anxiety, which eventually leads to destructive behavior. And aren't we seeing a bunch of riots now and violence on the streets? Well, this is where it comes from, all this negativity. Second of all, it's very deceptive. How is it deceptive? Well, first of all, if you remember, going back a couple of episodes, they started by saying, there is no truth. Everybody has their own truth. But now they're saying, you all have to listen to our truth. And you can't even argue. We're going to ram it down your throat. This is how the world is, and this is what we're going to do. So this is a total deception. Right? That's one thing. Right? I mean, they don't even believe in freedom of speech. Political correctness. Use the right words, right? I mean, I have kids. Our kids are sick of this, of being told what words to use. So these people are completely deceptive. First they say, it's okay, you can live in your own world. And now they say, no, now you listen to us. Now you do what we say, and you speak the words we tell you to speak. Okay? Secondly, they focus on language and education. What about actions? I mean, what is language and education? It's in the realm of communication, the mind, manipulation. So that's what they're focusing on. They're focusing on your mind. They're not focusing on making the world better. It's a focus on the mind, which should give you pause, because focusing on the mind solely is how you manipulate people. And then you can say, do as I say, not as I do, right? You do whatever you want, and then you just give people orders. And that's how all these dictatorships and oppressive regimes all throughout history have functioned. So they're functioning the same way, right? They obviously don't understand the real world because all they're doing is complaining and talking about how bad the world is. In the real world, if that's all you do, you get absolutely nowhere. You have to build. Because in this world, we don't get things for free, right? Money didn't just fall from the sky. We had to invent money. We had to invent cars and roads and cement and concrete and skyscrapers and glass. We had to invent glass, okay? Nothing was given to us. And so they just conveniently look the other way. They ignore all this stuff, right? Fourth, they complain about domination, but then the solution is that they're the ones to dominate. So how deceptive is that? So this is all just about what? Revenge. So if the blacks were oppressed, their solution is that the blacks should now oppress the whites. Their solution is not, let's compensate, let's settle, let's, if a wrong was done to a person, compensate them, punish the bad guy, whatever, and then let's move on. No, they don't move on. This is reverse discrimination. So they're bringing back discrimination. They're bringing back racism in the way that they want to see it. And they want revenge. So again, where does revenge come from? Well, Satanism supports revenge. And here's another example. They started with women's rights. And now what are they defending? The right of trans men to compete in women's sports. And in some cases even physically abuse women, such as in boxing. So they've completely done a 180. So this is a very, very deceptive type of organization and philosophy. Finally, it's destructive. They say they want to reconfigure education. Okay, what are you going to teach? Well, we're going to destroy all the forms of oppression. Okay, so you're going to destroy, but what are you going to build? What are you going to teach? They don't mention anything. No, we're just going to destroy. So what do you end up with? What do you actually end up teaching the children? What do you tell them to do? No, we just tell them not to do some things. Oh, okay. Well, what happens when you don't teach kids anything? Right? Civilization goes down the drain. Because civilization is based on knowledge. Knowledge is transmitted by teaching. If you don't teach anything, there goes your civilization. And then you sink back to barbarism, which means you're sinking back to your animal self and your animal desires. Gee, where have we heard that before, right? Satanism, one of the core principles of Satanism. So it's the same ideas, folks. So the reality is, wokeism is a very well marketed and sanitized form of Satanism. It is exactly the same ideas. Okay? They ignore the creator, right? I mean, when you say a religion's all about me, you're ignoring the creator. So no religion, right? If you remember, they took religion away. They demonize it constantly. Well, they tried to take it away, but they demonize it constantly. It's the number one enemy. What have we been told about our animal desires for these past few decades? We've been told, if it feels good, do it, right? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's my life. I do whatever I want, right? Laziness, which is also an animal desire. The government should take care of us. We shouldn't have to work hard. Give me a check, right? How about man is just another animal? How many times have we been told by science these past few decades that we share almost, it's like 97 or 98% of our genes are shared with monkeys? So all this nonsense about being created from a higher power, nonsense. We're just a better form of monkey, an advanced monkey. So man is just another animal, like the Satanists say, right? Same idea. What about selfishness and non-charitability of the Satanists? Where do we see that? Well, we see virtue signaling, right? Then you might say, well, wait a minute. Kids today do lots of charitable acts. Yes, they do. But what do they do them for, right? What do? They virtue signal. What is virtue signaling? Virtue signaling is a selfish, narcissistic form of looking for pleasure. You take pleasure in the fact that you're better than the other guy because you did A, B, and C, and here's the proof. Here's my video doing it. And I'm going to publish it to the whole world. Will they do those same charitable acts if nobody's looking? I wonder. So that is one sign. Many people now saying, and the second sign is many people now saying, I don't want children. I don't want to get married. I don't want children. Okay? In pop culture, children are portrayed as a drag, ingrates, brats. Who wants them? Right? Never mind the fact that they're just the future of this world, right? Well, let's leave that out of the picture, right? That unimportant fact, right? That's going to allow us to survive as a race. And what about this? This whole idea of I don't want children. Has anybody ever realized that this is really a mass sterilization campaign? Now, you may not be physically sterilizing people, but it's the same result. If you convince people not to have children, you sterilize them. It's the same effect. Plus, let's talk about trans theory and the trans gender changing surgeries and all that. So-called gender changing, but again, that's another lie, another deception, because you can't change genders. Okay? You can't go all the way. You can't have an operation and turn into a woman that is able to bear children. You can only go about halfway where you look like a woman, but you're sterilized. You're now sterile. You cannot have children. So you've been mutilated and sterilized. Okay? So how about that for selfishness and just insanity in general? Okay? We have a massive divorce rate. Why is that? Well, there's many reasons for it, but one of the biggest reasons is that we've been taught that love is all important. And what is love? What do we call love nowadays? It's not real love. It's that person, she makes me feel good. And the day she stops making me feel good, we're done. That's it. And of course, if you don't have any children to boot, then why not? It's easy. You can just split up. And many people do. And homosexuality and transgenderism is also an extreme form of selfishness. How so? Well, I can change my gender to whatever I want. I can reinvent the universe in my entire life, my entire reality, to match whatever I want, my desires. Again, following the principles of Satanism. What about endless vendettas in our culture? What's DEI and reverse discrimination? It's revenge for everything bad that's happened. Not justice, not let's correct the problem and move on. No, let's seek revenge. Okay? We see the cancel culture as well. What's cancel culture? Well, it's revenge. And those people who have power, just cancel them. Get rid of them. Right? We're not debating them. We're not proving that they're wrong. We're just canceling them. Okay? And also, if you look at the mentality of the left all the way back to the time of the hippies, to the 1960s when this all started, they did the opposite of what their parents said. They didn't think up of a philosophy of their own. If their parents said this way, they went that way. So if their parents said, we believe in death penalty, they say, no, man, we don't believe in death penalty. There should be no death penalty. If their parents said we should protect children, they said, no, we want abortion rights. What sense does this even make? It doesn't. They were just following what their parents said, but it was the opposite. It was inverted. Okay, which is another principle of Satanism, how they invert everything. Right? So, a philosophy like this is mired in revenge. You hate your parents so much that you just want to hurt them every chance you get. Just vengeance for what they've done. We're not moving forward. We're not moving past it. Just vengeance. Okay, what about power? Right? The idea of pursuit of power. Well, what's the left been doing? They've been tearing down democracy, right? In search for power. Once a democracy gets in the way of their power, they will tear it down, and they have been tearing it down. Okay? What about accusing your enemies, your political enemies, of the things that you do? Okay, this was one of Saul Alinsky's principles of power, of how to gain power. Saul Alinsky, if you don't know, was one of the mentors of the left a few decades ago. And one of the things he said is, in order to take over a system, do whatever you need to do and then criticize your enemies of the things that you're doing. And this is exactly what happens day in and day out. It fosters confusion, it puts your opponents on the run, and it's deception, which agrees with their whole kind of modus operandi. Okay, what about cancel culture? We've mentioned that in terms of vendettas, but also pursuit of power. Hell, we're not going to debate people. Just get rid of them. Just raw power. Just deplatform them. Don't let them speak. Okay? Pursuit of power. What about the undefiled wisdom that the Church of Satan talks about? Do we see any traces of that in our culture? What about ciencia es potencia? Knowledge is power, which we see all over the universities, right? Science without morality. Have you seen what our medical industry looks like nowadays? Where did this come from? Do we even have a Hippocratic Oath anymore? What about, have you ever heard this one? You can't legislate morality. No. Let's legislate immorality. How about that? Let's make murder and thievery legal. Is that what you want to do? Because you can't legislate morality because not everyone agrees on it. We better agree on it, or we know what's going to happen. Right? We mentioned before, Civil War. Okay? So finally, we have nowadays, and we saw this during COVID, the God of medicine and science. Okay? Whatever the doctors say, you have to do, or you're not following the science. Let me ask you a question. A few centuries ago, priests used to say that they had the word of God, and if you didn't follow them, you were following the Satan. How is this any different? Right? They're saying, hey, if you don't follow what I say, you're not following the science. Really? Is what you say always science? How do I know that? Have I verified all these scientific papers? Of course not. Who does that? So in the end, you're taking it on faith, just like the religious people used to do. So it's not that different. It's a similar organization of power and abuse. So lots of pursuit of power in our current culture. Matter of fact, you might make the argument that there's little else other than that. Do we criticize religion like the Satanists do? You bet. Right? At every turn, that's all you hear about. When a priest does something wrong, it comes out all over the headlines. Right? What about when a congressman does something wrong? Right? We're still trying to get the Epstein files to come out, right? It's like pulling teeth out of a bear. Are we ever going to see them? Who knows? Right? But we know where the bias is leaning now, right? And finally, what about no spiritual pipe dreams? Have you ever heard live for today? Carpe diem, seize the day? What is that? Right? Don't worry about the future. Don't invest in the future. Matter of fact, let's destroy families and let's destroy our economy so that we can't even support families. Right? Isn't that what's happening? You bet it is. Finally, the pursuit of happiness, which our founding fathers talked about, has been taken completely out of context and turned into do whatever you want. Right? So no spiritual pipe dreams, just, do whatever you want. Eat all you want. Don't worry about the fact that you might die tomorrow. Just eat all you want, right? As a simple example. So finally, the conclusion to all this, you might think, okay, we've talked a lot about wokeism and Satanism, and hopefully by now you realize they're quite similar. In fact, they're almost the same. Okay? But what's traditional philosophy like? Is it very much different? Oh yeah, it is. So let's conclude with this. Traditional philosophy is positive. Okay? There's a bright future for humans. We were created in the image of God. We're on our way back to God. We're bringing God down into this world. And you know what, folks? It's happening. Okay? There is reason to be optimistic. You just have to read history, which these people are not doing. Look back 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Have we advanced? You bet we have. Tons. So it's happening. It's real. Okay? They want to ignore it? That's fine. But it's real. It's actually happening. We are on our way back to the Creator. Okay? We have a tremendous amount of progress over the millennia. I mean, don't say it's not happening. You know, I mean, if you just go back a couple of centuries, we didn't have electricity. You know, if we had a drought, everybody would die because there wasn't enough food. You know, now it's just a minor nuisance. How much more power do we have now? How much technology? How much know-how? Just how many things do we have nowadays to make our lives easier? You want to stick your fingers in your eyes and not see it? That's fine. That's your prerogative. But it's happening. Okay? And humans are being elevated to thought and reason. The fact that we have an internet, and I'm speaking to you right now over that internet, is proof of this. Cavemen didn't need internet. Right? They were worried about killing animals and eating. Okay? Compare this with Satanism and wokeism. Everything's negative, lots of deception, lots of destruction. Okay? It's been tried before, folks. This isn't the first time people have tried Satanism. And every time they try it, they destroy themselves. Happened many times. Humans sink down to their animal level, and after that, they sink down into their own destruction. It's very simple. Just look at history. And we'll end with this. The same people who used to say in the 60s that they were tolerant, that, you know, there was freedom for everything, and they've become intolerant. They don't listen to anybody. They don't even debate anybody. They've become fanatical, and now they've even become suicidal by pursuing this Satanism. Because if you pursue a lot of these woke ideologies, like homosexuality, transgenderism, not having a family, then in 100 years, we're all dead. That's called suicide, folks. So, that's the conclusion. Thank you so much for listening. Next episode, we're going to delve a little more into why this works. Because hopefully by now you've seen how ridiculous it is. You might be asking yourself, well, how did this ever work? So we're going to be talking about that in the next episode and kind of what comes next. So thank you once again for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.